Hi, my name is Stacey Young, and I work with a number of education and training organizations in Toronto, Canada, as a consultant. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about assessing entrepreneurial competencies and involving your stakeholders in doing so. But first, a note about Canada. It's a little complicated. As you may know, there are 13 provinces and territories, each with its own slightly distinct education system. And although the differences are not great, the common language that binds them are what we call the 6 Cs, or the 6 global competencies. And they form the basis for entrepreneurial programming across the country for learners from K to 12. So, again, the purpose of today's talk is to think about teaching and modeling entrepreneurial competencies for the purposes of learning and assessment in more intentional and explicit ways. To give learners both the language of entrepreneurship, but also of creation and invention. And also to talk about how we can bring the so-called real world, the world of employment, into the educational process, and specifically to engage stakeholders in very manageable ways in learner assessment. And we tried to accomplish this at one Canadian organization that designed and delivered entrepreneurial programming in classrooms across the country. We started by going back to the architects of the learning of the programs. And we sought to confirm the basic goals and intended learning outcomes of the program that we were delivering. And then we built an assessment tool around those ILOs, or intentional learning outcomes, that included, of course, the entrepreneurial competencies. And we did this with a program that I will refer to on and off through the discussion today, called Investigate, Invent, Innovate, which we call iCubed for short. So let's step back 1 second and look at the competencies that are at the core of Canadian learning. So as I said, we start with the 6 Cs, the 6 global competencies, and they were sort of put together and reduced to 6 by Michael Fullan, who's a leading educational thinker in the world of both entrepreneurial competencies and broader educational reform. And he made them all start with C, so we could remember them far easier. So they are critical thinking and problem solving, citizenship, collaboration, communication, character development, and creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And just going back to iCubed for a second, what we did to develop our simple assessment tool for volunteers to use was we looked at the 5 tasks that we were expecting students to be able to accomplish upon completion of this program. And they included, performing basic research and environmental scanning, identifying and using the engineering design process. We asked students to make a prototype of their invention or product that solved an identified problem. We asked them to design a marketing and communications plan that described the product and how it fit into the market. And we asked them to design and deliver a compelling elevator pitch. And as you can see, what I've done for you is to show, as we did for our Canadian teachers, the relationship between the task and the competency. And I've extended it for today's purposes to include the EntreComp competencies. So if we take, for instance, the performing basic research and environmental scanning, we link that to our 6 Cs, not all of them, of course, but some of them, and broader yet to include those in the EntreComp framework, which includes empathy, critical reflection, multidisciplinary thinking, ethical and sustainable thinking. And we've done that for all the 5 tasks that were at the core of this program. And so now I want to talk to you a little bit about reimagining and broadening assessment to bring in your volunteers and your stakeholders. So what we started with is we designed a simple success rubric, a showcase success rubric. And it was designed principally for the non-educator. And of course, as rubrics do, it described what the various levels of accomplishment, if you will, associated with that competence. And we were asking volunteers in this simple rubric to take note of 2 competencies and 1 technical skill. Now, the rubric, as I said, identified what the various competencies looked like and provided the volunteer with a few cues in terms of the task we were asking them, which was to adjudicate the quality, the level of accomplishment of this competency and task and skill. And those 3 levels included emerging, proficient, and highly skilled. And what we found is that though we put a paper version of the assessment tool, the rubric, in the hands of volunteers, we gave them a clipboard, we quickly moved to a digital format because it seemed more subtle and less distracting to all players. And we developed we developed a very phone-friendly Google form so that anyone with a phone could use it, and I found I could use it. The other thing that's really important about this process is getting out of the classroom. So we explored opportunities with corporate funders, local companies, colleges and universities, always eager to have children on their campus, as well as other organizations, such as your local museum, to hold this showcase and to invite your volunteers to assess. And it would be organized on a regional basis. And this would allow students to interact with students from other neighborhoods, other districts, and boards. But we didn't have to do it that way. Of course, you could do it on a smaller scale and invite 1 or 2 classes from neighboring schools to your gymnasium, where you could feature these projects. And then there would be a little bit of interaction, but it would reduce the costs, for instance, that we faced for busing students over fairly long distances. The entrepreneurial success rubric. This is our rubric that we provided to volunteers. And you can see on the left column, there's a series of guiding questions, and that helped sort of stimulate that conversation between volunteer and student. And as you can see, we pointed out the competency and skill and gave a little bit a few more clues as to what to look for, and then some advice about how to judge that competency and skill, emerging, proficient, or highly skilled. And we did offer volunteers whatever training and preparation they felt they needed, including all volunteers got a kit that described the program and its intended learning outcomes and an overview of the curriculum. But on the rubric itself, we delivered this message to volunteers, which was, please keep it fun, make students feel good about what they've done, provide feedback in real time, and celebrate the accomplishment with the student. So be positive. Now, I'm just going to take a little bit more of a dive into the relevance of the competencies. So the communication competency. So elevator pitches get a little bit of a bum rap. They're a little bit more than what they seem. They provide an opportunity for the learner to reflect on the process of what has been learned. And we built the curriculum around ensuring that students understood there were 5 essential ingredients to a good elevator pitch. And they included the why. So why should we care about your project? What was the problem or need that you identified? How did you identify it? How did you come up with the solution? And please talk a little bit about the fit between the problem and the solution. Talk a little bit about the team. Who was on your team? Where were the skills allocated? What gaps did you have? How did you get along? How did you negotiate with one another? And then finally, the ask. What is the next step? Would you ask for investment? Would you ask for advice or mentorship? What's the next step? The execution of the vision. As I mentioned before, we asked students to develop a prototype of their invention or their product. And so at the showcase, we would ask students to demonstrate the prototype, to show how it worked. And the question is here very simple: did it work? The third was, again, a competency. So it's evidence of critical thinking and problem solving. And the engineering design process is, again, a multi-use competence or skill. It's a tool designed to help a creator plot out the process of creation and invention. It helps you go back and figure out if something went wrong. Where did it go? Maybe I have to tinker here, I have to tinker there. It's also a tool designed to provoke reflection. And so we're asking students to talk a little bit about the process of invention and the process of creation at the showcase. Just a few takeaways, I guess, that I would give you from our own kind of experimentation with these two elements, two goals, which was to make entrepreneurial competencies more explicit for the learner and to involve stakeholders in the process. And I would suggest that we just make sure that what we're measuring is meaningful and doable, and that we start with what's manageable. And so we started with these two competencies and one skill that we made sure were aligned with the programming. And we designed a very simple tool for volunteers to use, and we wanted to make it as fun as we could for volunteers and as easy, and to give them as much support as they needed. But above all, these events are so much fun. And so that would be the main takeaway, is to make sure you have fun. Thank you.